So let's add the API route to which we want to talk here. You learned that API routes are added by going to the pages folder, and then in there the API folder, and then in there the contact.js file. Now that file name is up to you, but this leads to a route of API/contact to which we can send requests to reach this API route. Now in there we should just set up a function, typically called handler, which is exported. And hence, of course, the function name doesn't actually matter. This function, as you learned, receives a request and a response object, and it only executes on the server side. It's never included in any client-side code. And here we can then handle the incoming request, check the request method, extract data from the request, and do whatever we need to do. And that's what I'll do here. I'll first of all check if request method is equal to post, because I want to submit this contact form with a post request. So any other requests will be ignored and will not do anything. So if the request method is post, then we'll continue. As a first step, I want to extract data from the body of that request. Now, thankfully, as we learned, Next.js will automatically parse that body for us, so we have this request body property which holds the request body. And we can now just get data out of that, for example, with object destructuring. And we could expect that we have an email, a name, and a message field in that body. We have to make sure that we add those fields to the request body when we send the request from the front end later. But here I'll assume that I have an email, a name, and a message property in my request body. Now we can validate that, because you learned that you should not trust client-side validation, because that can always be disabled or tricked. So here I then check if we don't have an email, or email does not include an @ sign by adding an exclamation mark here, or we don't have a name, or if we trim the name, it's equal to an empty string, or we don't have a message, or if we trim message, it's an empty string. If either of these conditions is met, then we don't continue. Then I'll return to stop function execution, and I'll send back a response with that response object, as you learned. There we can call status to set a status code and set this to 422, for example. And then also call JSON on that to add some data in JSON format, which is the de facto standard format for exchanging data with APIs, to add some data to the response. And here we pass our object where we could add a message property and say invalid input. Something like this. Okay, now if we make it past this if check, we have valid data. And then we want to store it in a database. Now that will be step number 2. For the moment, I'll just add a new message object here and just add my email, name, and message here, and then just console log it. But later we will also store it in a database, just as we did it before in the course already. But for the moment, that's it. And of course, I'll send back a response where I set the status code to 201, which means that it was a success and we added a resource. We stored the message, even though technically we didn't yet. And then maybe also a message here, successfully stored message, and also maybe send back the message if we want to. It's of course up to you which kind of data you want to send back. And with that, we're done with that API route. Now, before we connect the database, let's make sure we do add the front-end code for sending requests to it.